I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with, as you can clearly see, this is not Isabel Oakeshott. No, today it's me, Tom Harwood. Isabel is on a special trip to Poland, covering the refugee crisis at the border. Now, we'll hear from her later in the show. We'll also hear from a brilliant smorgasbord of expert guests. We have so much coming up this hour, but first, it's the headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Tom. 1 minute past 12. Here are your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Ukrainian president denies Vladimir Putin's allegations that Ukraine and the US are developing biological weapons. He's worried Russia might launch a chemical attack on Ukraine. The UN Security Council is meeting today at Russia's request to discuss Moscow's claims. President Biden's administration says the accusations are preposterous. President Zelensky says Russia's allegations might mean they're preparing to deploy chemical weapons in his country.
They accuse us, again us, that we are allegedly developing biological weapons. Allegedly, we are preparing a chemical attack. This makes me really worried, because we've been repeatedly convinced. If you want to know Russia's plans, look at what Russia accuses others of. Look, spreading such accusations in the Russian media shows that it is they who are capable of this. The Russian military, the Russian special services. It shows that they want it. They have already done such things in other countries.
Volodymyr Zelensky there. Ukraine's state energy provider says nearly 1 million people are without power and more than 220,000 are without gas in the wake of the invasion. The UK's Defence Ministry says Russia is likely to reset its forces for a new offensive. That's after satellite pictures appear to show its tank convoy outside Kyiv dispersing. In Dnipro, footage released by Ukraine shows the aftermath of an airstrike at what appears to be the site of a shoe factory. Russian news agencies say their troops have taken out 2 military airfields in the cities of Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk. They also claim Russian-backed separatists have captured the city of Volnovakha, the northern gateway to Mariupol. In Kharkiv, people are sheltering in metro stations as the city comes under relentless bombardment. The governor says residential areas have been shelled 89 times in one day. The mayor says 48 schools have been destroyed. Meanwhile, the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, has called for Russia to cease fire to allow civilians to get out of besieged cities.
The bare minimum is to establish humanitarian corridors where people can get out and humanitarian aid can get in. Any attack on civilians is violation of international law, is a war crime.
The government's going to ask Brits to open their homes to refugees fleeing the conflict. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove will unveil details of a sponsored route on Monday that will allow Ukrainians without family ties here to come to the UK. Those offering free accommodation will be vetted to ensure it's safe and secure for the refugees. It follows criticism the UK has been slow to help some of the 2.5 million people who've already fled Ukraine. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has sanctioned 386 members of the Russian Duma for their support of the Ukrainian breakaway regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. It's after Chelsea Football Club owner Roman Abramovich was sanctioned by the government yesterday over his links to Russian President Putin. British property developer Nick Candy is apparently still interested in making a bid for Chelsea and is examining the details of the sanctions on the football club. In other news, the High Court has ruled that the Met Police breached the rights of the organisers of a vigil for Sarah Everard by not allowing the event to go ahead. Members of Reclaim the Streets cancelled their plans in March last year after being told they'd be fined £10,000 each for breaking coronavirus rules. The policing of a spontaneous vigil that took place instead was widely criticised. The lawyer for Reclaim the Streets spoke outside court.
Today's judgment is a victory for women. Last March, women's voices were silenced. Today's judgment conclusively shows that the police were wrong to silence us. The decisions and actions by the Met Police in the run-up to the planned vigil for Sarah Everard last year were unlawful, and the judgment sets a powerful precedent for protest rights.
UK economic growth bounced back in January as the effects of the Omicron variant began to ease. The Office for National Statistics says GDP grew by 0.8% above pre-pandemic levels. That's compared with a fall of 0.2% in December. Experts, though, have warned the economy isn't out of the woods yet, with an inflation shock on its way. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though it's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, we hear from the GB News team on Poland as nearly 1.5 million refugees have entered the country from Ukraine. We'll speak to our security editor Mark White, who has been looking into the anti-aircraft systems now being sent to Ukraine and how they might be a game changer. And has China finally stepped up on the Ukraine crisis? We will be discussing this in depth, as well as the Chinese-Russian relationship. Now, give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. Now, welcome to the show. Senior defence and security experts have told GB News that Ukraine could eventually prevail in its efforts to resist Russia's invasion, if Ukrainian forces get enough Western-supplied missile systems, that is. It comes as the UK Defence Secretary revealed that Britain was now examining ways of sending a cutting-edge anti-aircraft missile to Ukraine. Our security editor, Mark White, has been examining the various anti-tank and anti-air systems already being sent across the Ukrainian border and their apparent effectiveness on the battlefield.
Western-supplied missiles have, it's clear, become a real thorn in the side for Russia's military. Easy-to-use lethal technology that's given Ukraine's otherwise heavily outgunned forces a real sting in their tail and helped slow Russian advances. Defence intelligence sources say more than 20,000 anti-tank and anti-air missiles have now been supplied to Ukraine. This includes 3,615 UK missiles so far, with more on the way. In fact, the UK was the first Western country to supply and train Ukrainian forces in the use of the NLAW anti-tank shoulder launch system, handing over 2,000 missiles long before Russia invaded. They are highly effective line-of-sight weapons.
Some of these people literally are straight out of the office. I mean, they've got no military training. And so actually having a weapon that is easy to use is brilliant. But for many of these people, that firing that weapon will be the first military act of their life.
The UK will also supply some Javelin anti-tank missiles, along with the 1,000 supplied by the US and some other nations. The high-explosive warhead has a much further effective range than the NLAW. The US has supplied more than 2,000 Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, with Germany sending a further 500 Stingers. But Ukraine says it's desperate for more. That's prompted the UK to announce it's now examining how to send some of its stock of Starstreak anti-air missiles to Ukraine. That system, which can be mounted on vehicles or even handheld, can propel a missile at 4 times the speed of sound and reach an altitude of 4 miles.
The difference between the Stinger and the Starstreak is the Stinger chases the tail of an aeroplane. It homes in on the infrared signature primarily from the engine exhaust. With Starstreak, you can meet the threat head on.
The Ukrainians have claimed their forces have been able to destroy more than 300 tanks, thanks mainly to Western-supplied missiles. And they also claim to have shot down around 50 Russian jets. We have no way of independently verifying those claims.
There will be no compromise on the part of the Russians. They will be beaten by the Ukrainians, which is why the missiles are so important, because those are the tools that they need to actually to do the business. I don't think Russia quite understands the trouble it's in.
Well, 14 countries have supplied missiles to Ukraine, and despite Russia's objections, they're continuing to smuggle many more over the Ukrainian border.
GBNews security correspondent Mark White, security editor, I should say. I shouldn't demote him live on air. Mark White now joins me in the studio.
Can demote me anytime, Tom, not a problem.
First of all, let's explore what these defensive weaponry systems really mean, because earlier this week we saw a bit of confusion about whether or not NATO countries were willing to send across what might be more classed as offensive weaponry, aircraft and the like. At the moment, we're sticking to what can clearly fall in that defensive category.
Yeah, I think actually that, you know, the missile systems, the anti-tank and the anti-air missile systems, in the end are proving much more effective than 29 of these MiG aircraft that are in the Polish government's inventory that they say they would give to the Americans to go to Ramstein Air Base in Germany for onward transferal to the Ukrainians. The trouble with the MiGs, they're very symbolic, of course they are, but getting them up off the ground in any meaningful sort of way, I think is going to be difficult for the Ukrainians. It's
pretty old Soviet technology, isn't it? A MiG is a plane that requires a lot of ground assistance and constant communication with the ground. And also, it seems to be that a lot of the shelling of cities, particularly in the south of Ukraine, is coming from ground Russian troops rather than from the air.
Yes, that's right. I mean, in terms of the MiGs, obviously, you get them up in the air. Well, Russia also has surface-to-air missile systems, a very significant number of them. It has many more of its own aircraft. But I think in terms of the ground troops, as you were mentioning, and these anti-tank and anti-air missiles, they are proving very effective because clearly Ukraine can't meet Russia head-on in a tank-to-tank battle. They're outnumbered and outgunned in that sense. But actually drawing them in, especially into urban areas, attacking them with anti-air missiles and anti-tank missiles is already, according to Western analysts, proving very effective. Of course, we've got the claims about how many armoured vehicles and tanks and the like that the Ukrainians say they've taken out. We've no way of independently verifying that. But the Ministry of Defence here in the UK have been carrying out their own assessment. They've assets on the ground and clearly satellite imagery and the like. And other Western allies certainly say that the Russians are suffering some very significant losses here.
And extraordinarily, some abandoned tanks as well. We've seen this quite a lot on social media. Don't know how far wide-reaching it is, but certainly it seems that when the Russians and their relatively poor logistics run out of fuel or whatever else it might be, they abandon some pretty heavy machinery for Ukrainians to tow away with tractors.
Yeah, I mean, and it's understandable why they would, because they're effectively sitting ducks. If they run out of fuel, they can't go anywhere. You're just sitting waiting to be hit with, you know, a British-supplied Enlaw missile or a Javelin missile or whatever happens to be aimed at you. So if you're out of fuel and you're sitting quite vulnerable like that, you can see why they're abandoning some of the equipment. Now, this is not to say that Russia isn't making some very significant advances. Of course it is. We've seen the tactic of surrounding these cities across Ukraine, then starting to do what is in the Russian game plan, which is to bombard them either with missiles or artillery. So that is taking place. But the more of these Western missile systems that can get into that country to arm the many members of the Ukrainian military, but also volunteers, those reservists and the like who've all been called up, the more weapons, anti-tank and anti-air weapons they can get, then the more effective they can be. And it may be, at the end of the day, they're outgunned, of course they are, and it's going to be a hell of a grind even. But in terms of actually taking the battle to the Russians in their own cities, it's possible, that they could prevail, that it just becomes too down and dirty for Vladimir Putin's forces to get involved in this urban warfare, that he's looking for some kind of compromise.
Well, I suppose the worry there is that Mr. Putin wants to avoid this hand-to-hand combat, this urban warfare. And what we saw in Syria, particularly with Russian-backed forces and their allies, was a sort of siege mentality, a shelling of a city, but also potentially the use of non-conventional weapons. And this is a development this week, with President Zelensky last night alleging that the Russians are laying the groundwork for use of chemical weapons.
Yes, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. I was going to go on to say that particular aspect, as Vladimir Putin not making the advances he would like in terms of, capturing these cities and getting the people in the cities and the government to capitulate, becomes increasingly desperate and again uses what have been tried and tested hideous tactics that have been launched by the Russians in the past in terms of, obviously, with Assad's forces in Syria, the use of chemical weapons, the use, and we've already seen it according to reports from credible intelligence sources, these thermobaric weapons that suck the oxygen out of the surrounding environment to compound and expand the yield of the explosive charge on these weapons.
Of course, these thermobaric weapons, many countries have outlawed them. Russia has not. These are not, the use of them is not in and of themselves a war crime. That is, unless they're being used against civilians, as is probably the case. But when it comes to chemical weapons, these are classed as weapons of mass destruction. These are a very, very different step here. With the people that you have been speaking to across the Western officials that are looking at this situation, what would be the potential consequence of Russia crossing that red line?
Well, a further condemnation, of course, even tougher sanctions. Remember, the sanctions are coming in a tiered manner. So the more that Russia does to step up its attacks, the more sanctions that are being imposed on that country. And of course, it's not just official sanctions from governments. You've seen right across a broad spectrum of organizations and companies that are also now refusing to do business with Russia. So that would happen. But then further down the road, you're looking potentially at prosecutions in the International Criminal Court. But the difficulty with that, of course, is Russia doesn't recognize that. So how are you ever going to get Vladimir Putin unless there is a change of leadership that is a much more friendly Western leadership in Moscow that decides at some point in the future to hand him over? That may be unlikely, though, and I think we should be careful what we wish for, because there is no guarantee that if Vladimir Putin is replaced, or there is some kind of rebellion in that country, that we would get the kind of government that the West would want. And remember, this is a nuclear-armed state with the potential to descend into chaos. So some very worrying times, I think, ahead.
Certainly. I hadn't considered that possibility of destabilising a nuclear-armed state. Who might get their hand near that red button? That is a very scary prospect. But for now, Mark White, thank you for talking us through those issues there. Well, coming up, we'll be crossing over to the GB News team in Poland. But before that, let's take a little look at the weather here in Britain.
Hi, this is Mark with your latest forecast, and it's looking like a rather changeable day across the UK on Friday. We're going to see rain spreading its way northwards, sunshine and showers following on from the south, and it will be a rather windy day as well. Now, those strong winds are being brought around by some fairly tightly backed isobars across the UK through the day, and this cold front here, that's what's bringing the heavier, more persistent rain northwards across the country. So we pick up on that rain then lying across many central parts of the country by around lunchtime on Friday. To the north of it, across Scotland, northeast England, mainly dry here with some brightness, and to the south of it, sunnier skies will follow, but there will be a scattering of showers, and some of these could be on the heavy side. A windier day generally, like I said, particularly across coastal areas where we could see some local gales, but despite that, a mild day as well, with temperatures generally ranging from 8 degrees in the north to 12 or 13 degrees there, further towards the south. Now, through the rest of Friday into the evening and overnight, that heavier, more persistent rain will continue to track its way northwards, so turning quite wet across much of Scotland, and behind it, staying largely cloudy with some further showery outbreaks of rain through the night. Now, winds will tend to be lighter overnight compared to Friday day, and that could lead to 1 or 2 fog patches for Northern Ireland, but generally not a cold night anywhere, with temperatures not falling below 4 to 8 degrees Celsius. So we get off to a rather cloudy start on Saturday morning, a bit of a disappointing start to the weekend with still some further showery outbreaks of rain, particularly across northern areas, showers, but gradually through the day, I think fewer showers developing across many parts of England and Wales, with more in the way of brighter, sunnier skies for many areas. And winds will be lighter as well, so in that sunshine, I think it will feel quite warm, quite spring-like, with temperatures reaching 12 or 13 degrees there, cooler for further towards the north. Now, all eyes to the west, though, later on in the day, as we see heavier, more persistent rain once again spreading in from the Atlantic, and some strong winds tied in with this as well, wrapped around an area of low pressure. So we could see quite widely coastal gales across many western parts. That's definitely one to keep an eye on. Further towards the east, though, drier with lighter winds here. Staying unsettled into Sunday with a mixture of sunshine and showers, quite windy, like I said, but gradually turning drier and brighter into the early part of next week.
We've got a big Saturday for you on GB News. From 6 a.m, it's breakfast with Stephen and Anne. At 10, join Esther and Philip for the Saturday selection. Alistair, Darren and Nana take you through the day. And don't miss Neil Oliver Live at 7 p.m. At 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight, followed by Headliners. That's Saturday on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, Europe is facing a humanitarian crisis, which is little more than just a few weeks old. Since Russia rolled its tanks and missile launches into its neighbour Ukraine, suburbs have been flattened, uncountable numbers of people have been killed, and millions have fled the country in terror. Our regular Friday host of this lunchtime briefing, Isabel Oakeshott, is on a special trip to Ukraine's neighbour, Poland, with the British Parliament's all-party group on Poland. She's been seeing how the country has dealt with the vast numbers of Ukrainian refugees crossing into the border and how the UK could learn from the generosity shown by the Poles. She sent us this report from Warsaw. Well, that wasn't Isabel Oakeshott, but that was some of the scenery from Warsaw. What we're going to go to now is another package. Let's have a look.
The clatter and clamour of a busy kitchen near Warsaw as two families prepare for supper. Eugenia and her partner Alina have been taken in by a Polish family they'd never even met, along with 12-year-old Sasha and Marina, who's just 5. A few days ago, it was a different kind of crashing they heard from their apartment in Kiev, the terrifying roar of Russian bombs raining down on their home city.
The evening, we started to hear these explosions more often, and we really realized that it's time to leave. So maybe I still had doubts, and I was hoping that maybe next day it will all stop. And Alina said, okay, I take children and go. I don't remember that we even told something to children, but we were talking to each other, so so Sasha understood what is happening, and Marina, she was just scared. So when I was packing, she took her best dress and put it into our luggage and said, "Mom, will we get back?" I say, "Of course we will."
Eugenia said she would have stayed to fight like her sister if it wasn't for the kids, but her relief at being safe with her family is clear.
I cannot tell how much we are grateful for all the Poland and all the people here. They are just, it's amazing. So I couldn't even imagine that there will be so much support from Poland. Really, it's like, so we are living now in a house of one Polish family. They have 3 kids, their own, and now they have all of us with our dog, with a cat.
Despite such a short time knowing each other, these two families seem to share a deep bond. Mum of 3, Violetta, says she was well prepared for the likelihood that their stay would last much longer than a few days.
Tak naprawdę mam takie poczucie, że przyjechali do mnie znajomi. Ktoś.
I don't see them as strangers. I feel like they're my friends come to visit.
Przyjęcie kogoś obcego do domu.
Eugenia and Alina are very lovely. It's not a problem for us at all.
Wspaniałe kobiety.
Since the Russian invasion began, we've heard so much about the generosity of the Poles in welcoming refugees from Ukraine. But it doesn't really feel real, I think, to us in the UK until you actually come into a home where a Polish family has welcomed complete strangers into their daily lives. And everybody is coexisting in a pretty merry chaos, really. Everybody is mucking in together and trying their best to make this work, not really knowing how long it's going to be for. Eugenia and her family are among 1.5 million Ukrainians who've fled the violence in their country and come to Poland. Among those making it across the border to safety were 20 sick children, many of them battling cancer. They've come from Kharkiv, a large city in the east which is being flattened by Vladimir Putin's forces. He says it's to denazify Ukraine. The faces of these children tell a different story. And despite the heroism of aid workers helping on the border, it's clear to me that even those who work for charities struggle to come to terms with what they are seeing.
This is the most tragic moment when you see children crying. You know, the first time I was on the border in the reception point, I saw drawings on a wall, and one of them was the simple one, "Daddy, I love you," and they're heartbroken. Yes, and these are the pictures that will stay with me for whole my life, and I hope they will find themselves soon.
Western nations have been remarkably unified in their support for Ukraine. Kamala Harris, the US Vice President, visited Warsaw on the day we filmed to shore up the NATO alliance. But the warm words stop short of direct military help on a scale that the Ukrainians would like. And with refugee numbers now threatening a humanitarian crisis in Poland as well as Ukraine, ministers here are calling on friends like Britain to do more.
Nie mamy najmniejszej wątpliwości, że są pewne ograniczenia. No, co do tego nikt nie ma wątpliwości.
It's only 1.5 million refugees now, but there could be millions more to come.
No, ale jeśli działania wojenne na Ukrainie nie zakończą.
And if that's the case, then we will be asking our British friends and other European friends to accept more refugees.
For many back in the UK, the efforts to help Ukraine's refugees have left a lot to be desired, with only minimal numbers accepted and huge bureaucratic hurdles for the rest. There are signs now that that may change, but it's clear that Ukraine's trauma will not end soon, and Britain may soon have to wrestle with an immigration crisis to match any we've seen before. Isabel Oakeshott, GB News.
Such a powerful report from Isabel there. Well, I'm delighted to say we can now cross over to Przemyśl on the Polish side of that border with Ukraine, where Isabel Oakeshott and GB News reporter Bradley Harris are there and joining me now. Welcome to your programme, Isabel, really. Thank you for letting me sit in here. First of all, you've been now in Poland for some time. What's the impression of how the country is managing what is an extraordinary influx? Well, while we try and establish communication with Isabel there, let's hear some of the latest headlines now.
Thank you, Tom. It's 12:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. President Zelensky says he's worried Russia might be preparing to launch a chemical attack on Ukraine. He's denied Vladimir Putin's allegations that his country are developing biological weapons with the US. The UN Security Council is meeting today at Russia's request to discuss Moscow's claims. The UK's Defence Ministry says Russia's likely to reset its forces for a new offensive, as satellite pictures appear to show its tank convoy outside Kiev dispersing. Russian news agencies say their troops have taken out 2 military airfields in the cities of Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk. They also claim Russian-backed separatists have captured the city of Volnovakha, the northern gateway to Mariupol. In Kharkiv, people are sheltering in metro stations as the city comes under relentless bombardment. The governor says residential areas have been shelled 89 times in one day. The mayor says 48 schools have been destroyed. Facebook's parent company Meta has temporarily relaxed its rules on hate speech to allow users in some countries to call for violence against Russian soldiers. The UN has described the development as concerning, while Russian state media say prosecutors are now seeking to have Meta designated as an extremist organisation. Here, the government is going to ask Brits to open their homes to refugees fleeing the conflict. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove will unveil details of a sponsored route on Monday. It'll allow Ukrainians without family ties here to come to the UK. The High Court has ruled that the Met Police breached the rights of the organisers of a vigil for Sarah Everard by not allowing the event to go ahead. A spontaneous vigil took place instead, and the force was heavily criticised for the way that was policed. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. It's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, China has described the situation in Ukraine as a war for the first time since Russia invaded nearly 2 weeks ago, marking a change in how Beijing has publicly spoken about this unfolding crisis. Russia, of course, has always called it a special military operation. China has previously refused to call Russia's attack on Ukraine an invasion and has yet to condemn Moscow explicitly for its actions. So is China actually stepping up and questioning the Kremlin's narrative, or is this all just optics? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Chief Executive of Hong Kong Watch, Benedict Rogers. Welcome to the programme. I suppose it's good to see that China has acknowledged that this is more than a special military operation in Ukraine. That seems to be a slight divergence from the Russian narrative, although certainly not quite going the full hog in terms of rightly laying blame where it lies.
That's right. It is certainly a welcome shift. But of course, what we should remember is really that China has helped facilitate this war. If it's the case, as we're led to understand, that Xi Jinping and Putin discussed this in some form during the Winter Olympics. Apparently, Xi Jinping persuaded Putin to wait until after the Winter Olympics. And of course, Chinese businesses are very much stepping into the void that's been left as a result of Western sanctions by Western companies pulling out of Russia. So China is complicit with this, and it hasn't condemned it. But nevertheless, of course, recognizing it as a war is a significant and welcome shift.
I suppose there are some open questions here as to what China does next. There has been a large expectation that China will rush in to fill the void left by Western sanctions. It's notable, in fact, looking at that UN vote last week, that there were many countries, over 100 countries, that voted to explicitly condemn Russia, but China was not among them. Might we be seeing a shift from Russia now, potentially into the orbit of the Chinese economy?
Yes, I think we're definitely seeing that. I think that companies like Huawei have reportedly been increasing their presence in Russia to help with Russian telecoms and IT. I think various financial companies are stepping in because of the withdrawal of MasterCard, Visa, American Express. And I personally think we ought to be looking at secondary sanctions. If we're sanctioning Putin's regime, we ought also to be sanctioning those who continue to do business with him in place of Western companies.
This is really getting quite serious in terms of the economic implications of if we're going to start sanctioning China as well. The implications on sanctioning Russia for Western consumers is huge. I can only imagine how gargantuan they would become were we to bundle China into that as well. I wonder, though, that judging by how the invasion has gone, it clearly has not gone all to plan for Mr. Putin, and clearly there's been a more united and larger response from the West than potentially he thought. I wonder if this makes China reconsider how viable it is to snatch other people's territories. I wonder if the united Western response to what has gone on in Ukraine might make Taiwan that bit safer.
I certainly hope that is the case. As you say, the invasion of Ukraine has not gone entirely according to plan. I think Putin and Russia and China have probably been surprised by the extraordinary strength and courage of the Ukrainian resistance to the invasion. And I think hopefully they've also been taken by surprise by the speed and robustness of the Western response. I was asked by the Daily Telegraph, I think on the day of the invasion, to write a piece for them on what the invasion means for Taiwan. And I began the article by saying Xi Jinping will be watching the Western response very closely. And if the Western response is weak, that will embolden him to step up plans to seize Taiwan. Now, that was written before the West got its act together and really responded with great unity, speed, and strength. And I hope that response, as well as the resistance that Putin is meeting in Ukraine, will indeed give Xi Jinping pause for thought over any plans regarding Taiwan.
It seems we're entering a very distinct era in international relations now. After the thawing of relations, the trying to welcome in both Russia and China, the golden era, as it was called back in 2011, 2012, back when it comes to Russia, President Obama, during a 2012 presidential debate, said that we're not in the Cold War anymore. Russia is not a geopolitical foe. It seems like we're very much past those rose-tinted days, and that Western leaders across the board are waking up to the threat of authoritarian regimes now.
Yes, I think that's correct. I think Western leaders have been asleep, have been rather naive up until very recently, both about Russia and about China. I think that clearly the invasion of Ukraine has woken people up, has made people realize that Putin's regime is a direct threat to the free world, that this is a struggle not just about Ukraine, but a struggle between democracy and autocracy, and that in that struggle, the other major autocracy that is not only repressive within its own borders, but increasingly aggressive beyond its borders, is China. And I think slowly over the last couple of years, people have been waking up to the China threat with seeing what the regime has done to Hong Kong, the evidence of genocide of the Uyghurs, of course, the handling of, particularly in the early phases of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the awakening to the dangers of Huawei, which we had our own debate about in the British Parliament 2 years ago, and the government shifted its position quite rightly. So all these factors, I think, are waking people up. And the particular shift by Germany and Olaf Scholz's speech a couple of weeks ago, where he completely changed German foreign policy, at least in rhetoric, and hopefully he will implement the things he's said he will do. So I think, yes, the free world is now waking up, rather late in the day, but better late than never.
I suppose the big question now is how long can the West stick with its newfound backbone? Certainly it looks like Angela Merkel's legacy is being torn limb from limb, but just how much longer will the West be able to stick with the tough line it has taken? That remains an open question. I'm afraid we've run to the end of this conversation. It's all we've got time for. Really appreciate your time this afternoon, Benedict Rogers of Hong Kong Watch. Thank you for joining us. No doubt this conversation will run and run as the months go on. Well, now moving on to a story that caught my eye this morning. In some remarkable research, civil rights group Big Brother Watch has proved that politicians are walking into an anti-free speech trap that could censor their own comments, the comments of those politicians backing new legislation. Now, this is highlighted by Angela Rayner's comments on terrorists. In February this year, Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, said, "Shoot your terrorists and ask questions second." Now, when this was posted on Facebook by a dummy account set up by Big Brother Watch, it was taken down for breaching the code on violence and incitement that Facebook has. Now, the government is intent on pressing ahead with the online safety bill set to be published next week, and this creates a new category of regulated, legal but harmful speech. And this would hit the very politicians forcing through that change, as we saw there with Angela Rayner's comments? Well, let's explore this a little bit more with the legal and policy officer at Big Brother Watch, Mark Johnson, who can join us now. Welcome to the programme. First of all, you did this experiment with a number of comments from a number of politicians, all of which were taken down from Facebook, even though these comments were legal speech.
That's absolutely right, yes. You mentioned the example of Angela Rayner's comments with regard to terrorists. We also had previous comments by Boris Johnson about the burqa, which are very well documented, and also comments by Nadine Dorries talking about what she would do if her daughter was accosted by journalists. In each case, these politicians' comments were unpleasant. They could be considered unpleasant, certainly. But that alone is not enough to constitute censorship when it comes to traditional freedom of speech standards. And this really begs the question, if Boris and Nadine Dorries' own words aren't allowed on Facebook, why are they clamping down on free speech online? And why are they making these nonsensical terms of use state-backed? Because that is exactly what this bill is doing.
Absolutely, and this is the crucial point, isn't it? It's not about Facebook's own policy, which one may agree with, one may disagree with. It's a private company. To some extent, that is up to them. It's about this new law that would enforce potentially even stricter policies on companies. So no social media company would be allowed to put such content up on its sites.
That's right. We're walking into quite a free speech crisis with these measures. You've mentioned already the legal but harmful provision. What this is going to do is compel platforms to deal with speech which is deemed to be harmful and then effectively uphold these policies consistently. We can already see that in many cases these policies are nonsensical at the moment and that they don't respect traditional free speech standards. And what we're going to walk into is a worsening of this kind of censoriousness, and we're basically outsourcing online speech policing to Silicon Valley.
It's such an elegant example, using politicians' own words, politicians who support this law, who are introducing this online harms bill, seeing themselves being censored. Do you think that there's any recognition that these people might actually realise what their own law, which, I've seen some of the draft online harms bill. It's an incredibly long thing. Do you think that any MPs have actually read it?
I hope that they have, and I hope that they will scrutinise it very carefully. But I also hope that our experiment here will really make them take stock of some of the measures that you've spoken about and the impact that this could have on freedom of speech. We spoke at the start about the example that of Angela Rayner's comments, but previously when Keir Starmer was asked about this bill, he said he would support it at second reading, come what may. I hope that if there's a chance that his front bench might actually be effectively self-censoring by supporting legislation of this kind, that they might think again. And I hope that Boris and Nadine Dorries do as well.
It's an extraordinary situation. Unfortunately, this bill seems like it is progressing. Let's hope that some people can wake up at the very last moment. But for now, Mark Johnson, Policy Officer at Big Brother Watch, thank you for joining us and talking us through this very concerning story. Well, now we can actually cross back to Shemesh on the Polish side of that border with Ukraine, where Isabel Oakeshott and GB News reporter Bradley Harris join me now. I suppose with 2 million extra people in the area, the signal must be a little bit dodgy, but I think we can establish connection here. Isabel, just talk through what you found while being there over the last day or so.
Hi, Tom. Well, I've spent my time so far here in Warsaw interviewing the politicians about the scale of the crisis that they are now dealing with. Yesterday, for GB News, we interviewed the Deputy Prime Minister and also the Education Secretary here, who talked at length about the challenges that will be faced by the schools here. We've got something like 500,000 children have come over the border, and now the question is how to absorb those into Polish schools. And what amazed me was actually the willingness of the government here to contemplate that. It's hard to imagine the British government saying, yes, sure, we're going to absorb 500,000 extra children into our schools, but they've already got a plan for that, and it seems to be fairly well organised. I'm here with Bradley, who has been in Poland since Sunday and has been having some very different experiences. Bradley, what have you been seeing so far?
Yeah, well, Isabel, we're currently standing in one of the main train stations in Przemyśl. We're standing in a very grand lobby at the minute, but just next door it's a totally different picture. There is a room filled with mothers, children laying down, trying to rest their heads. Some of these refugees that have fled Ukraine have been on journeys of 20, 30 plus hours, journeys that normally take 5 to 6 hours. When I arrived here on Sunday, I also arrived in Warsaw, made a 6-hour journey down to this city. This city is the closest place to the border between Ukraine and Poland. I was expecting chaos, really a lot of disorganisation, but actually at Medyka there is a sense of people coming together. There's a huge volunteer effort, and there's a big sense that the people of Poland are willing to open their arms to those who live in Ukraine and who are looking to flee their country. So I've been speaking to people in despair, people from Britain in fact, turning up in their vans with goods in the back, doing what they can to help those who literally have nothing at all.
Yes, Bradley, it is quite an experience to arrive here at this train station, and what strikes me is actually how phenomenally well organised it is here. They've now had several days of this crisis unfolding, and I'm struck by just how well set up it is actually. Outside it's extremely cold, but here in the station, beautiful surroundings. It's an extremely elegant station. They've got the heating on, full pump. It's really quite cosy and very well set up system for refugees to get free food, to get toiletries. There are bags of toys for children. And right here, I'm not actually seeing children in great distress, which was something I was worried about. I'm sure those scenes are elsewhere, but here everything is very, very calm actually. Rows and rows of refugees with all their belongings waiting for the next step in this long journey that they're making and not knowing quite where they're going next.
Well, let's talk about that next step very briefly, because of course you met a family who were hosting complete strangers, refugees welcomed into their home. Do you have a sense of what proportion of people have found homes, have found where they'll be staying until this awful war is over, and how many are still stuck in the shelters and the train stations?
Well, I don't know what the figures are, and certainly at places like this there are hundreds and hundreds of people who are effectively in limbo. Now, they are comfortable, they are, as I said, being fed, they've got a nice environment here as a very temporary stopgap. We're hearing about many volunteers coming and being ready, many Polish people ready to welcome anybody into their homes. And at that house that we interviewed, where we interviewed the family yesterday, that was in a sort of village where many of the families locally had taken in Ukrainian refugees. And I think what's remarkable about this is that the families that are hosting don't know how long this is going to be for. It is a remarkable act of generosity to take people in, and it's not always just one person, just two people. It's the pets as well, the dogs, the cats. And you don't know how long that's going to be for. And for families to have to rub along together, that is quite challenging. But we found that these host families feel a remarkable bond with the people that they are helping. They see them as brothers and sisters, and they are just ready to do whatever it takes.
Well, what a remarkable moment in history this is. Isabel, thank you for bringing us that news live from Poland there, and good luck with the rest of your time there. Now, with rocketing energy prices, it's not just households that will face the burden. Energy-intensive industries like steel will also face extensive pressures. I'm joined now by Frank Oakeshott, the Energy and Climate Change Policy Manager of UK Steel, to discuss the challenges that the industry faces. Welcome to the programme. The steel industry has had a torrid time over the last few years, and I suppose the price of energy is really going to start to bite even further.
Yes, that's what we're seeing now. Over the last 9 months, 12 months, we've seen energy prices such as gas, electricity increase dramatically in the market, and that's impacted steel as well. As you know, steel production is incredibly energy intensive, particularly very electro intensive. So it means when the gas prices increase, it's like we've seen over the last week to dramatic levels, unprecedented in the last 25 years. We'll see the same effect as well in the electricity system as well. And that impacts steel producers here in the UK. And as a result, over the last 9 months, and in particular over here over the last 2 weeks since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we are seeing steelmakers having to halt production to manage their production because of the electricity prices, because of the gas prices.
And what's your expectation? What's your hope of what the government might do? We've heard some of the policies that are going towards families, but we haven't heard all that much that's going towards businesses.
No, they're quite. And I think what we have put forward to the government is to say there are some policy levers that you can pull now, in particular on electricity prices, where there are several levies and taxes that are politically controlled. And we've put forward to say now's the time to reduce those down, to put them down to similar level as Germany, and actually use the Brexit freedoms to perhaps even go further, provide a level playing field. It's difficult again to impact the wider gas market from a UK government perspective, but the tools available to the government should be used now. And that's what we put forward to the Prime Minister, to the Secretary of State at Bays, Kwasi Kwarteng, and we've seen that the government has been quite willing to consider these things. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister said in Parliament that the government was coming forward with a package of policies.
Well, that is fascinating, and we will look over the coming days as that package comes out. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the programme there, but Frank Oakeshott from UK Steel, thank you for your time. I'm sorry we had to cut that so short. Now, you've been watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. I'll be back on Monday at 9:30 a.m. See you then. Up next, it's Liam Halligan with On the Money, but for now, I'll leave you with the weather.
Hi, this is Mark with your latest forecast, and it's looking like a rather changeable day across the UK on Friday. We're going to see rain spreading its way northward, sunshine and showers following on from the south, and it will be a rather windy day as well. Now, those strong winds are being brought around by some fairly tightly backed isobars across the UK through the day, and this cold front here, that's what's bringing the heavier, more persistent rain northwards across the country. So we pick up on that rain then lying across many central parts of the country by around lunchtime on Friday. To the north of it, across Scotland, northeast England, mainly dry here with some brightness, and to the south of it, sunnier skies will follow, but there will be a scattering of showers, and some of these could be on the heavy side. A windier day generally, like I said, particularly across coastal areas where we could see some local gales, but despite that, a mild day as well, with temperatures generally ranging from 8 degrees in the north to 12 or 13 degrees there, further towards the south. Now, through the rest of Friday into the evening and overnight, that heavier, more persistent rain will continue to track its way northwards, so turning quite wet across much of Scotland, and behind it, staying largely cloudy with some further showery outbreaks of rain through the night. Now, winds will tend to be lighter overnight compared to Friday day, and that could lead to 1 or 2 fog patches for Northern Ireland, but generally not a cold night anywhere, with temperatures not falling below 4 to 8 degrees Celsius. So we get off to a rather cloudy start on Saturday morning, a bit of a disappointing start to the weekend with still some further showery outbreaks of rain, particularly across northern areas, but gradually through the day I think fewer showers developing across many parts of England and Wales, with more in the way of brighter, sunnier skies for many areas. And winds will be lighter as well, so in that sunshine I think it will feel quite warm, quite spring-like, with temperatures reaching 12 or 13 degrees there, cooler for further towards the north. Now, all eyes to the west though later on in the day as we see heavier, more persistent rain once again spreading in from the Atlantic, and some strong winds tied in with this as well, wrapped around an area of low pressure. So we could see quite widely coastal gales across many western parts. That's definitely one to keep an eye on. Further towards the east though, drier with lighter winds here. Staying unsettled into Sunday with a mixture of sunshine and showers, quite windy like I said, but gradually turning drier and brighter into the early part of next week.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 1 o'clock and welcome to On the Money, where we're focused not just on this military war between Russia and Ukraine, but also on the economic conflict between Russia and the West. Today,